big events like the Crown Jewel that bring everyone together just makes us realize it's an us all around, you know? It's not like they're aliens and we're aliens over there. And I think that having these events and sharing our culture in Saudi Arabia is the first step for us to really be able to understand each other, to find that common ground. But like, where else would I mean, this is a great opportunity to have a bunch of kids in Saudi Arabia loving a part of American culture. I mean, WWE is part of American culture that they are inviting in and embracing, and you have these kids.
The name and no.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. I am your host, MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to talk about Ronda Rousey and her ghostwriter going ham on Vince McMahon in her new book, Our Fight. That's unfortunately coming out on my birthday, April the 4th. In it, she wrote some very harsh words for the old man in an attempt to sell a bunch of books. So let's talk about this thing. We're not going to spend all day on it, but it's been floating around the internet for several hours. So it's worth talking about, I would imagine. So I'm not going to read the entire thing. She is apparently writing or dictating or whatever this book for a non-wrestling audience. I come to that understanding because she goes through the trouble of explaining who started NXT, which is ridiculous. She then compares Vince McMahon to Emperor Palpatine, which I think is a character from Star Wars, and yet I know nothing about Star Wars, so I can't respond to that because I have no idea what Star Wars is about. Help me out in the comment section. She then says, it's hard sometimes to know where the evil, unethical slimeball character of Vince McMahon played out for the camera's ends and the actual, questionably ethical, many times sued, and many times accused of sexual misconduct Vince McMahon begins. That blurred line between character and reality is a recurring theme within the WWE universe. Okay, that's a fact. You know, people have said that, and it is true. You never know when Vince is in character, you put it in quotations, and when Vince is just being evil businessman Vince, which we already know that he is. She then continues, pay-per-views held in major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia, as well as now twice a year in Saudi Arabia, a nation that restricts the rights of women in a way that I'm certain Vince McMahon wishes he could. Interestingly, Vince's wife, Linda, used to be the president of the WWF. So why would he want to restrict women's rights and then also let Linda handle some vital parts of his business for years and years and years? And of course, he had his daughter into the business for a while. He said, well, that's family, of course. But Vince McMahon was the first promoter to hire a female referee. That female referee then turned around and sued him for rape, but he was the first wrestling promoter to hire a female referee. He was also the first wrestling promoter to have a full-time women's division. Not a, well, we have women sometimes. There was a women's match on the very first WrestleMania. The first one. Now, he wasn't the first to feature women's wrestling, but he was the first one to take women's wrestling seriously with Vince McMahon. I have to say this all the time because people forget. They think that it was just Divas era and then Sasha Banks and all them showed up. No. There was an entire division in the 80s. And there was a women's tag team division in the 80s. When Ronda Rousey was a little girl, he was already doing this. All right? So this is stupid. But a lot of people are noticing also that Ronda Rousey had nothing bad to say about Saudi Arabia while she was there or while she was promoting the Crown Jewel shows. A lot of the people who are now on Ronda's side of this issue, even though I don't really see it as an issue, I'm just talking about speaking facts here. It's a show. You're welcome to not like Saudi Arabia, but she was promoting the show and she did appear at one of the Saudi shows, what was it, 2 years ago? So, it is what it is. So, you can say whatever you want about the Saudis. I'm pretty sure they don't care. But, it's just an interesting bit that I'm noticing here. Now, I say that Ronda Rousey is not really writing this. I say that Ronda Rousey has a ghostwriter. I don't know whether that's true or not. It just feels true to me. But I will say this, and again, I'm all about speaking the facts, not necessarily taking somebody's side. Not in this issue anyway, because I don't like either one of these people. Well, I love Vince. Vince is one of my favorite white folks ever. Ronda, not really. Not really one of my favorite black people ever. But the point of this is that I don't feel the need to defend Vince. I feel the need to correct the record. How people for years have said that basically it was just the Divas era, and then where there was bra and panties matches and all that stuff, and there was nothing before it, and apparently nothing after it. The entire WWE wrestling, women's wrestling thing was the Divas era, which was a very short amount of time between, what was this, maybe 2001 and 2011, 2012 maybe. So for about 10 years. So all the years before that, when Vince spent all that money to bring in the Fabulous Moolah, who of course ended up being who she is, because the Fabulous Moolah was not the very, had the best reputation. But then again, these things were not known at the time that they were being done. When Vince was flying Japanese women over, like the Jumping Bomb Angels, to work in the WWF, everybody thought he was nuts. But he believed in having something for everybody. A little of everything. This is why he tried to have midgets divisions more than once. These are just simple historical facts. Okay? So, as we were talking about this Divas division, Ronda Rousey dictates ghost rights, or somebody else wrote this. WWE loves to do well-produced video segments about the legacy of women within the organization. But the truth is, women have largely been footnotes. For the longest time, they have been relegated to serving male characters in a valet role, an overly sexualized supporting character that takes cheap shots when the ref isn't looking. Over time, as the level of female talent grew and society as a whole started to shift, the organization gradually expanded the role of female wrestlers. Incorrect. Okay, again, there was women's wrestlers in the 80s. There was women's wrestlers in the 90s. All right? The idea that there was just valets. As a matter of fact, name all of the valets between 1980 and 2000. Okay, I could probably name them. It'll probably take me two hands. Let's see, Sherry Martel, you had Sapphire, you had Miss Elizabeth, you had Sunny, you had Sable, you had maybe Tori, Big Muscle Tori, not Tori Wilson. You had, who else? The Cat, she wrestled sometimes. Chyna, that's 8 right there. Now, we can name all the women's wrestlers. Well, we'll be here all goddamn day. All right, because we got tag teams like the Jumping Bomb Angels, that's 2 women. Rockin' Robin, that's 3. Fabulous Moolah, that's 4. Sherry Martel, that's 5. Medusa is 6. Bull Nakano is 7. You got Bertha Faye, who wrestled as in Japan. That's 7. That's 8 right there. You got Aja Kong. That's 9. You've got the Glamour Girls. That's 10. Because there was a tag team. Princess Victoria. That's 11. I mean, we got numerous women's wrestlers. Sable even wrestled. They forced Sable to wrestle, by the way. She didn't want to wrestle. They forced her to wrestle. All right. Trish Stratus. She was also a valet, so she counts as one for both. We could do this all day. So it wasn't just like the women were relegated to being valets. That's just not historical truth. There was not as many women's wrestlers as there were men, but there aren't as many women's wrestlers that that are men right now. Anywhere, except for in Stardom. That's the only place where there are more women's wrestlers than men. Every wrestling promotion has more men than women. Every single one. Okay. But the WWF had at least one women's match at the time. Throughout the 80s and 90s. Even when they didn't have a championship. They still had women's matches from time to time. Now, she continues. WWE builds itself as an organization just like in the mainstream entertainment industry. There was, by all accounts, a casting couch culture where men backstage in powerful positions pressured female talent for sexual favors in return for airtime. There were so many public accusations and scandals, it's hard to keep track. And more than that, I'm sure WWE managed to sweep under the rug. I noticed he didn't give any examples. You would think that it would be so many, you would at least have one example. Some people consider somebody like Ashley Massaro. They think that she was trading sex or she was pressured. You would give you another one, Christy Hemme. There's, of course, a lot of accusations about John Laurinaitis potentially doing unsavory things with young ladies who he hired or had working relationships with. So, yes, there are a lot of accusations out there. But you would think if you're going to write that in your book, you would at least give some examples. I'm talking some real solid examples because you actually can if you wanted to get into the mudslinging business. Otherwise, why would you even bring it up if you didn't want to indulge? Or, since you worked there and you worked for Vince for several years, you could talk about the things that you've seen. But, okay. She continues about the Divas era. She says, women weren't just being demeaned backstage, but center stage. Up until 2007, bra and panties matches where female wrestlers won the match by stripping their opponent down to their underwear were an actual fucking thing. Even after that gimmick was retired by WWE executives, I'm sure very reluctantly and with a lot of lamenting about political correctness, it was still clear that the organization placed more value on women's physical appearance than her physical ability. Guess what? You're in a physical business. Vince McMahon has gone on record and said that, I think when he was talking about the Ultimate Warrior, he was talking about steroids, and he's probably bullshitting. But his comments were basically like, it's like Hollywood. He's looking at you from like the chest up. And the better you look, the more likely it is for the audience to react to you and all that kind of stuff. That's just common sense. You're in show business. You're in entertainment. You can't just have your eyes all over your face and then think that you deserve to be on TV. Like, it doesn't work that way. They throw a mask on you. Even if you were like an ugly dude, you were always a heel. If you were some kind of grotesque monster like Andre the Giant or something like that, no disrespect, but if you were like a big, weird looking human, you were almost always a heel because people are scared and have fear of giant, ugly things. So if you were a small, ugly thing, you were probably going to end up being a heel or under a mask or just not on television at all. Common sense, you want to call it pretty privilege, so be it. But this is also the same Ronda Rousey who tried to bully the ring girl, Ariane Celeste, who they had like a really nice stretch of a beef in like 2015 to 2016. And where Ronda was, let's be honest, she was jealous. She was making a lot more money than this ring card girl. But the ring card girl was living quite well just because she was pretty and everybody liked her. And she wasn't getting punched in the face for a living. And Ronda didn't like that. She was like, no, you should have to be a fighter to get paid by the UFC. Who says? Who says you can't be one? Why can there only be room for one? There's no room for the other girls? The girly girls, the girls who are pretty and the men want to give them money and not see them get punched in the face? Weird. But she continues, because of course she does. They always do. The feminist grifters, they never seem to stop. The Divas era, with its pink rhinestone butterfly title belt, dawned around the same time. Women, while now portrayed as wrestlers, were still expected to look a certain way. Think lots of makeup, little clothing, and huge boobs, which is, pause, that's still a thing today, by the way. It would take almost another decade, years after I proved women could be a huge combat sports attraction before women truly started to get time in the square circle, what diehards call a pro wrestling ring. Well, that's not entirely true, because TNA was doing this before. WWE had did it before. Again, they did it in the 80s and did it in the 90s, where they had women's matches. They weren't substantial, like 30-minute matches or anything like that. The Alundra Blaze, Bull Nakano matches were probably sub 10 minutes, but they still were there. Remember, Whitney Richter was a huge angle for the first WrestleMania. They even brought in Cyndi Lauper for that angle. The Wendy Richter thing didn't go well. We know that she wanted to get paid more, and Vince was like, nah. And then that ended up killing that whole thing, and pretty much did almost irreparable damage to the division. But he put time and effort into it, and he even brought in a celebrity force, similar to when he brought in a celebrity, Mr. T, for the men. Again, these are historical facts. These are not defenses. These are historical facts. If you want to be a person who claims that there was nothing but misogyny at the same time, you can talk about these things and then talk about how they went sour, because it continues your point. What you're doing is miseducating people who are listening to this. You can talk about Wendy Richter and then tell Wendy Richter's story. She was put on the cover of magazines. Everybody talked about how big a star she was going to be. And then she asked for more money, and Vince said no, which you could probably blame on her being a woman. And then that whole thing was thrown away. How the women's division was abandoned in the late 80s or early 90s, where Rockin' Robin was the champion, and they pretty much threw that belt away. How Luna Vachon, who I forgot about earlier, tried to bring the women's title back, and she was constantly told no. How she was forced into doing the sexualized stuff. There's things you can talk about, but this surface level bullshit that Ronda Rousey is spitting here is actually very sad. But this is how you know she's just trying to sell books, man. She's just trying to sell books. But let's finish this up. She says, and it was only after WWE was basically armbarred into it, following a global social media backlash to give divas a chance, after divas were given a total of 30 seconds, less time than it takes people to read this paragraph, for a nationally televised tag match. Yes, and sometimes men's matches are 30 seconds too. She continued, 4 women were given less time to collectively wrestle than every single man on the roster got for his intro music alone. Presented this information as a person outside the wrestling world, you might draw the conclusion that there is a troubling, foundational sexist patriarchal culture within the WWE. You would be right. I have nothing but respect for the female wrestlers who paved the way for women's wrestlers today, and nothing but disgust for the amount of sexist, degrading bullshit they were put through. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So Ronda Rousey, she's out here. She's trying to sell some books. She's trying to get people to read this stuff after she torched her reputation by saying she would never fight a trans person and all the other things that she participated in, and the Sandy Hook hoax that these people are talking about, none of which I find to be anything worth dissing her over. She shouldn't want trans people in UFC. She has to actually fight them. So no, that's probably, she had a hard enough time fighting women. She wouldn't want to fight let's just move on. So I don't have a problem with what Ronda Rousey said. I just have a problem with it being inaccurate. If you're going to tell the story of this sexist, patriarchal culture and all this shit, you're going to have to do more than just the Divas division, the Divas. It's like, you can do better than that. You can talk about more than that. There are things that if you want, especially if you're talking to a non-wrestling audience, you can give them, if you bothered to care, which, you don't, you're just trying to sell books, if you cared, you would go into some of this stuff, tease it out a little bit, and then talk about your own experience. Did you enjoy going to Saudi Arabia? Because I can see many times that you said you did. Did you feel threatened in Saudi Arabia? Were you concerned about other women going to Saudi Arabia? Because there were people who were, especially during the first time when Natalya had stuff thrown at her. People were concerned that the women might get mistreated over there. There's some real things for you to discuss. But Ronda Rousey found almost none of them. She gave no really good examples of anything. It's all surface level, Twitter bait, and she got what she was looking for, which is the feminist clapping in approval. But my big issue with everybody talking about the divas is it erases all of the women who came before them. It erases all of the work Wendy Richter did, all the work Sherry Martel did, all the work that Alundra Blaze and Bull Nakano and the Jumping Bomb Angels and the Glamour Girls, All those people who came in the 80s and in the 90s who was trying to make women's wrestling a thing, it erases all of them when you focus on the Divas division. Or when you talk about TNA, where it had the beautiful people who were half naked on TV every week. Despite the fact that they claimed, oh, they really did it. What was the difference between the beautiful people and the Divas division? Nothing. The difference was that their matches were a little bit longer. That was the difference. But when you talk about women's wrestling, the AWA, which I forgot about earlier because they're an older organization. They actually had a running women's division. It was deactivated for a time, but they had a women's division in the 80s, and the WWF had a women's division in the 80s. They both were well, AWA went out of business. And then some of their women, like Medusa, who ended up being Alundra Blaze, and Sherry, and a couple others, ended up going to the WWF. But they had a women's division. The WWF had a women's division. They actually put money into this thing, trying to make it work, and it didn't work. Other people put money in trying to make the women's division in wrestling work, and they didn't work. So now, the social zeitgeist changed. Some people are a little bit more accepting of women's wrestling, and they're a little bit more into it, and they're a little bit more okay with women having more than one match on the show, being in angles and doing different things. But the idea that what Ronda Rousey is saying is 100% facts, it's not. It's not anywhere near true. A woman was pinning men in wrestling matches in 1999. How do you explain that? You know, how do you, like, these things don't make sense. What happened is the social culture changed. That's what happened. Now people are allergic to beautiful women. They're firing cheerleaders. They're trying to get rid of ring card girls. They're trying to do all this stuff that nobody would ever thought to do this stuff in the 70s or 80s. Even if they wanted to have a women's division, they still would have had beautiful women on the roster. Now it's a crime to be sexy for some women. It's not a crime to be sexy if you're nasty. You know, like if you're a porn star or you're one of these female strippers / rappers, you could be as sexy as you want. But if you're a model, which, guess what? Half these women, matter of fact, scratch that, 90% of these women who are wrestling today are still models. Toni Storm, Mariah May, Sky Blue, fucking Julia Hart. They still take sexy pictures and they put them behind on an OnlyFans or a fan time account or something like that. So you still ain't changed the culture the way you thought you did. Because all on their own, these girls are out covering themselves in whipped cream, doing fetish videos like Jordan Grace and all this kind of stuff while still being pro wrestlers. The only difference is there's not a WWE logo in the corner. They're still doing the same shit that they claim WWE. Oh, they were forcing them to do Playboy. Now they're doing it on their own. What's the difference? There is no difference. They're still getting paid to be fucking naked in front of a camera. And Ronda Rousey thinks that she shook up everything. That all of a sudden, everybody forced this stuff to happen. No, it's the same as it always been. It's just some of us are now forced to watch Candice LeRae. That's your big accomplishment, is that now everybody has to watch Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell. And these women that nobody want to see because they have no charisma, no body, no personality, and don't look good. That's the flag you want to wave. I got mid bitches on TV. I popularized the mid bitch. Meanwhile, you were UFC's glamour girl. You were out there winning fights, but also they had you walking the red carpet in heels with full makeup and all that bullshit. Get out of here.
Yeah. We're just gonna